I'm very happy to be here. I think as many of you know, I've had the privilege of working in the Coke system for 25 or 30 years, I think, kind of a long time. Never as an operator, never as an owner, but always passionate about my partners at Coca-Cola. And while we're all from very different countries around the world and we come from very different perspectives on how our markets operate locally, the thing that we all have in common is a responsibility for the vision and the capabilities of the Coca-Cola system, and really creating and leveraging advantage. If you think about our historical competition, who we've focused against in the past, and you think about the possibilities in the future, I think all of us can see that the competitive landscape, and the customer landscape for that matter, is going to change pretty significantly as we move out to 2025. I'd like to share that I have the honor of working with 15 or 20 different retail executives around the world each year. I think I'm probably in 30 countries, 35 countries a year, and I'm with either CEOs or presidents of various retailers in those markets pretty frequently. And what I'd like to share with you is I think we're at a very, very important time in retail. I think we all understand that traditional trades that we've had in our markets for centuries have been going through transformation for 20, 30, or 40 years. And yet the modern trade, the Carrefours of the world, the Tescos of the world, and the Juscos of the world, operators from all over the world, 7-Elevens in the world, I think are waking up to a new reality today. And the reality is that the consumer is changing. What enables the consumer is changing. And most retailers have very inflexible business models. They're very asset intensive. Real estate, trucks, warehouses, central organizations, very inflexible, slow and hard to move. And yet as they look out and they see their marketplace and they see the consumer, they can see significant transition going on around them every day. As we begin this discussion together today, I'd like you to think back on the last conversation you had with your most important customer. Did you really listen carefully? As you listened, did you hear that customer really messaging you in a different way? Did you hear that customer, whether it was a QSR customer, whether it was a convenience store customer, or a hypermarket customer, did you really hear them say, we need to be different? We need to approach this in a different way. I'd suggest, it's my opinion, that we're in as important a time, as transformational a time in retail as maybe the tractor was to farming. Everybody think about the impact of a tractor on a farm. Pretty transformational. Or perhaps the automobile on transportation. Pretty transformational. Or the telephone for communication. If you think about how transformational those three technologies were, those three capabilities were, I believe, and I think your customers believe, that we're at the beginning of a similar transition. And yet they don't know how to move their assets around. That's the complexity. They are not flexible companies. And so as we think about how we approach these companies, we too may or may not be the most flexible company. We have a lot of assets around the world. We have a lot of people around the world. And it's difficult to reshape and reconfigure. These are things that take many years to plan and execute. So as I go through my discussion today, my goal is really simple. It's to get you to think a little bit about how your customers will begin to think about their future and what their business models really need to look like in order to be effective in the marketplace that we're headed. Remember, these are transitions that take a long time. They have inflexible business models. They need new capabilities. They need new technology. They need new supply chains. And as we see these unfold in the world, I believe that the vendor structures, that is the way that they engage with partners such as Coca-Cola, will change pretty significantly as we move towards this time frame, 2025. So today is really an exploration. It's not really intended to be prescriptive. It's much more of a guided discussion. Who can see the future here in the room? It's a very difficult thing. But what we can all do is we can begin to make some assumptions about the future that we think are pretty reasonable. And the value of a room like this is that each one of you can make these assumptions broadly, but make them very specifically for your local market. Our advantage, after all, at the Coca-Cola system ultimately is local. So translating these large, big picture transitions that I'm going to describe today to how that impacts you right where you operate is really your responsibility. Secondly, there's 6 big topics that I'm going to talk about today. For those of you that I've worked with before, there could be many more. Ask my friend Fernando or Carlos. We could do this for about a week, couldn't we? So the point really is that we focused in on sort of 6 fairly large subjects, each of which has a few dimensions to it. This is no different than the presentation I made 3 weeks ago to a really large retailer. It's no different than the presentation I made about 8 weeks ago to a very large digital retailer. This is exactly what they're talking about. This is the concepts that they're trying to evaluate and fold into their thinking, their business model. Flexibility is a real problem in retail. We are an inflexible industry with a huge asset base that really needs to go through significant transformation. So as you think about your role after today, I would just challenge you to think about a couple of things. What do you see here as being the most important, and what responsibility do you want to take? And candidly, if you think about the really big questions that I think will come out of today's discussion, it'd be really interesting for us to think together about what the really big, hard system questions are. There's this fellow named Reed Hastings who started Netflix, and I'm going to talk about Netflix in just a few minutes. And if you think about Netflix, like many newer companies, he's had to reinvent his company several times. And if you really listen to how he leads, he doesn't let his people skip past the hard questions. He forces the hard questions right up front, and he deals with the easy stuff afterward. And so what I think will happen today is I may sound a little confrontational. It's not on purpose. I'm going to try to sound confrontational because I'm going to try to push you. I'm going to try to move you into a place where you're completely uncomfortable. Everybody ready to be uncomfortable? Okay. So that's my job, is to help you think about the world a little bit differently. Secondly, from this moment on, I'm going to be a retailer. I'm going to talk to you as if I'm working inside a large retailer organization, and I'm no longer an advocate for Coca-Cola. So I am, but I'm not. So the point is that I want you to recognize that I'm going to push on you. Thirdly, I just want to remind you that I know each of you come from very different markets around the world. I have to, because of the nature of this discussion, I'm not going to ignore different market stages, but you're going to hear me really concentrate on the leading markets, the markets that are sort of in the midst of the most transformation. Forgive me if I don't talk about your market or countries exactly like yours. It's really because of the nature of the topic and the idea that we really need to push and think a little bit differently than we have.